Hello, and welcome to Be Positive Speaks Radio Ministry. I'm your host, Melanie Carter, and today we're talking about processing the positive and negatives in our lives. But first, I'd like to dedicate this episode to all the mothers who are to be, mothers who hope to be, mothers who have lost, and mothers who long. No matter your journey and desire, this episode and episodes to come are for you. If you're not a mother nor desire to be one, that's okay. This may help you support a mother you know. Miscarriage, child loss, and maternal loss are all very touchy subjects, but we all know someone who has been through it. Many women aren't always open to showing and sharing their tragic stories, but for them, we will. Be Positive Speaks stands in the gap, and on today's show, we have Siera Bramschreiber. Siera is a wife, mother, and believer. And like many of us, she's had her fair share of grief and loss, but also an immense amount of joy. She uses storytelling to share the difficult and the beautiful. She's also a highly sensitive person who happens to have a few degrees in clinical psychology as well as organizational psychology. Sierra, we're so glad to have you on this show. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. I am so thankful and honored to be here. You had a beautiful introduction, so I just wanted to thank you. And the thing that just touched me so much was when you said, that some people have a hard time sharing their story. And so for you, we will. And um, it is my privilege and honor to be vulnerable and to share my experience and always hoping that it can help speak to somebody else. So I literally have to. Thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure to have you. So, I want to get into this because this is a touchy subject, but it's an important subject. And so, Sierra, I would love to just hear your testimony, hear your pregnancy journey. Tell us your story.
Yeah, thank you. I have to start before I got, which is honestly, I had a lot of fear around pregnancy, and I wasn't sure I wanted to ever be pregnant. And it took years of prayer and conversations with my husband to kind of dismantle that fear. I knew that if I ever was going to be pregnant, that I wanted it to be, I didn't want fear surrounding that decision. So we actually didn't start trying to conceive until we were 8 years into our marriage. At that point, we were very sure and very, very ready. And so in 2021, still kind of in the thick of the pandemic, we decided to try. And in July, my husband lost his job. So July 2021, he lost his job. In August 2021, we found out we were pregnant with our first. And we just felt like it was God's timing. We're like, He brought us here. He's going to get us through it. Everything felt like it was falling into place. Knew we wanted to relocate. So when he lost his job, we thought, oh, this is a great opportunity. And when we found out we were pregnant, we were like, oh, this is amazing. This is just what we wanted. So we were so hopeful and optimistic. Um, and we started to try to make our way out to San Diego, where we currently live. And we had a pit stop in our hometown until my husband could find a job. And we were there for 9 days, I think. Um, and that's when, about 8 days is when I started to experience cramping and some spotting. And I just wasn't sure what was going on, but I was still like very, I don't want to use the word naive, but maybe optimistic. I was like, I knew, I just didn't think that I could lose that baby. I thought that baby was here to stay. And so I just was uncomfortable and I was like, what's going on with my body? But surely I'm not losing my baby. And then later that evening, it was confirmed that I was likely experiencing a miscarriage. And as anyone who goes through that loss knows, it's not just a singular event. It is something where they're doing blood draws and they're trying to confirm, are your hormone levels going down? Did we just calculate things incorrectly and maybe the pregnancy's behind? So there's like this minor bit of hope, I guess, maybe they're wrong. Um, for me personally, once we got that confirmation at the hospital, even though we didn't have all the other specifics, I knew. So it was a process of managing my own heartbreak, as well as my husband's optimism, wasn't going through his body. So he was still clinging to that faith and hope for us, which in hindsight is so beautiful. In the moment, it was so maddening because I was going through so much inside my body. But yeah, it was a very difficult loss. I gave birth at my sister's house in her bathroom. And there's so many details there. There's so many things to process with loss, but ultimately, September 9th is when I gave birth to our first baby, and we named him Ozzy. Several months later, we named him Ozzy. I was about 8 weeks. A lot of just heaviness that surrounded that, a lot of grief, sadness, couldn't get out of bed, you name it. I was just locked in into a physical position, laying on the bed, and just in a world of processing what happened and then everything that happened thereafter. All the thoughts, all the feelings that came with that, seeking to talk to people about it, which I know it isn't a common response, but I was just like determined to like get outside of this feeling that I was having in my body. And I was determined to try to understand it. I can share more details on that later, but ultimately we moved to San Diego after that loss. We got to San Diego like right at the end of October. So we had a month of family as we were grieving, which hindsight is a blessing. And then we got to San Diego, which is where we wanted to be. And eventually we were ready to try again. So in 2022, that April, I found out I was pregnant again. There were a lot of emotions around it. We wanted to, oh, yeah.
So you were talking about what happened in April.
Yeah. So I got pregnant again, and then I was pregnant a little bit longer that time. I was pregnant for 12 weeks, and I started to lose that baby again. And yeah, that one was a lot harder on me than the first one, I think, because maybe I knew what to expect. And then, yeah, we had a huge healing journey. I think a lot of my actual healing happened between the second pregnancy and the third. So I got pregnant in November, or we found out we were pregnant in November of 2023. And now we have little Nigel with us. He's almost 1. So he was born in August of 2020. No, I got pregnant in 2022. I'm trying to think. He was born in 2023. Sorry. Let's blame it on postpartum and keep it moving. But he's gonna be he's gonna be 1 this August, 2024. So yeah, maybe I was pregnant twice in 2022. That April and then in that November. Anyway, there you have it.
Well, it's a beautiful story because, I definitely understand when you communicate about the heaviness you feel and trying to figure out, okay, what happened? What did I do wrong? How can I fix this? Does anybody else have the same experience? How could I have prevented it? So many things run through your mind, so many questions, so many what ifs, because like you said, you're just holding on to that hope. And then your husband, and thank God for husbands, right? But they have
Yes.
no idea what it is to feel that emptiness of womb.
Mhm.
And it's filled 1 second and then it's empty the next second, and you're like in shock. You're just in a shock.
Mhm.
But I really want to ask you this question is, what was your emotional processing period like versus like after your first one versus your second one? Like,
Mhm.
how long did it take? What did you do?
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Totally. I would say the first one, again, I went into that pregnancy super optimistic. You think, oh, it will never happen to me. And I hadn't really known anyone personally, or so I thought, who had experienced that type of loss. So I went into it very optimistic, and that impacted my grief process. So it was just like, wow, this happens to people. Like it was just a learning experience for me, because I was learning so much about miscarriage that I'd never heard. So there's like a knowledge piece. And then in terms of the emotional piece, I felt like I was in a bubble of pain. I no longer felt like the Sierra I knew before she experienced this grief. I felt like an entirely new person. I never had known that level of grief before in my life. Um, I was in so much pain. I was crying. I was in like stuck in bed. And I just remember writing everything down because my biggest fear at that time was I don't want to forget this baby. I knew them for a little while, and my mission was to remember everything, the good and the really difficult, when they were here, when I gave birth to them. And sadly, that story ended there. Um, of like, there was no, oh, and then we went to the beach and then we did this. Their life story ended after I gave birth to them. So it was very painful, but writing for me was a way for me to process every little detail that was happening. And in hindsight, I don't know if I was processing the emotion, but I was honoring that intention of remembering. And that made me feel like I was moving through the feelings, even though in hindsight, after I went through that second miscarriage, I realized that maybe I hadn't processed my grief in the way that I thought I had. So in that second pregnancy, there was a lot of avoidance. There was a lot of believing I was speaking in faith, but really I describe it as like trying to bully God into giving me this baby. And it it created a lot of resistance in my mind and my body. So that miscarriage, that birth was actually a lot more painful. And instead of just sadness, I think more than anything, I felt a lot of anger and frustration in that second loss because I just knew it wasn't going to happen again because I had prayed and I had read this and I had done this and I had worked out and I was trying to use all these actions to stop it from happening, to control it. And you can't, you can't do that. You can't, in the words of society or culture, you can't manifest a baby the way that people try to manifest things on, social media or in their actual lives. And so that was a really difficult moment. It felt, I was more angry. It felt harder to get through that loss and harder to talk about that loss. I talked about my first loss so much more freely and publicly. That second one, I still have a hard time talking about it because of the way that it felt. But ultimately, it got me to a therapist, and I got clarity around what I needed to do to move forward, and I ultimately got a depression diagnosis from a clinical psychologist, and that changed my life. And as hard as that second loss was, uh, my therapist said this to me, and I believe it wholeheartedly, that baby Rue, is what we named them, that they saved my life.
mm,
Um, so yeah, very
wow.
different experiences across the two.
I'm looking for the words to convey how beautiful and powerful it is for you right now to share this moment because I in my heart feel the heaviness and understand the heaviness of that initial loss. And When you talked about trying to command God, we have been trained in church culture to decree and declare and command God to do what we want and do it right now. And it's like, stop, hold on, who's in control here? God is not our puppet. He's not our genie. He's not our fairy godmother with a wand and says bippity boppity boo. Okay. God, the thing about it is, he sent his only son, and his only son had to go through suffering before victory.
Mm-hmm.
And your story is such a testament to the suffering we go through before we receive the victory. Praise God that we have Nigel here with us, and he will be one coming soon.
Mm-hmm.
But Ozzy and Rue, they were very real. There are many people who would like for you to believe that they were just fetuses, just blood clots, or tadpoles, shall we say, but they had spirits. They existed. They had a mother, they had a father, and they were very real. And unfortunately, um, they were here for a second. Um, but they were here. I love Proverbs. I think it's in Ecclesiastes actually, and Solomon's all like, I'm telling you right now, Ecclesiastes is a depressing book. I don't know if anybody's ever read Ecclesiastes, but it's a very depressing book. But he's like, it's better for you to never have been born and seen the sun than to live on this earth. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if you look at it from Solomon's perspective, you would say Rue and Ozzy actually have it great. They are in the bosom of the Father. And I know that so many times we try to replace our tragedy with, like you said, manifesting and speaking things into existence.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I'd like to believe that we can hold on to God's promises and his truth, that he will bless us. He will bless our wombs, or he will, because sometimes the child you receive is not the child you birth, it's the child you adopt. It's that child who is needing your spirit, your righteousness that God has put within you to bless them. And the thing about it is, we're so focused on our own personal hold that we miss the children that we're supposed to nurture and care for, that are for us outside of our bodies. Those nieces, those nephews. And I get it. I get it's um nothing like having your own. I get everybody wants to have that physical experience. Not, well, some people want to have that physical experience, but, um, you know, once you experience that loss and that tragedy, it almost feels like you are trying to catch up in a race. When you stutter step over a hurdle. I did hurdles. You were a sprinter. When you got out of those, when you got out of those blocks wrong, you're trying to catch up and you can't because how you started messed with how you finished. And so I definitely get how hard that can be. But for our listeners, Siera, can you tell me what encouraged you to keep hoping and trying?
Yeah. I want to, if it's okay, go back to something you said because the connection of, Solomon saying it's better for you to have not seen the sun, to not even have been here to begin with. One, I think that could probably be if I heard that, if someone told me that in the middle of my grief or right after it happened, I'd be ready respectfully to fight. So I want to just for any listeners who have gone through this loss, and I know what it's like to hold that baby and to want that baby and to see that baby. So please don't hear us saying um, you're better off or the baby's better off or any of those things because that one it's highly insensitive of where you are in your journey, and two, there was no one who could tell me that. There was nothing I wanted more from this baby in my womb, to hold them in my arms and have whatever future that God had for us. Um, I wanted so badly. So um, don't hear us, or don't hear me saying that your desire and your hope for that is that you know that God, even that God did that to you. That God was like, okay, we're going to take this baby from you, which is a whole nother conversation. That I never believed that, and I think that helped my healing process. Because I never had to turn away from God, or I never blamed God for what happened to me. I was still able to keep Him in my corner through my healing journey, and I think that made a tremendous um, impact on my ability to hope, on my ability to try again, was because, you know, we talk about our faith uh, is very central to who we are. And um, I think believing, and not only believing, but knowing that God is not punishing me by trying to take this baby away from me. God's not trying to teach me a lesson. This is biology. This happened. This baby was here. Now this baby isn't here anymore. Just like I am here now, and I will not be here one day. One day. So I think that my values and my beliefs about God helped me be willing to try again. I think the unhealed part of me believed it could never happen to me again. So there was a stubborn, avoidant part of myself that allowed me to keep trying for a second time. And I think for the third time, that that hope was, my husband and I had a desire to have a family. My husband and I had a desire for that baby to travel through my womb, and that didn't change. And so once I had my depression diagnosis, was treated for depression in the great company of one of the amazing therapists in this world, who I love and appreciate, still speak with to this day. She, yeah, with her help and with medication and with the support of my husband and with healing, we decided we were going to try again. And um, it was a family decision, and it was a healed decision that third time to keep trying, because that's what we wanted. And we went into that decision knowing that, okay, if this baby cannot be sustained in my womb, then maybe we'll look at other options to start a family. But we wanted to try again. And I'm so thankful that I was healed enough to do it and had the support to do it. And
This is Nigel's here. This is
yes,
the very, very real Siera, you all.
yeah.
And I love that you're unafraid to just unafraid to correct or challenge even thoughts. Um, and that's okay, because I agree with your sentiments. This is not to diminish anyone's journey. This is to highlight, because we all have experienced it in different ways. And so many of us try to forget. And that's what we're here to talk about. When we have that negative process, I remember the last time we saw each other in person, earlier this year, I went to see and meet Nigel, and help Siera. And Siera taught me that I too needed to process my negative traumas with my own miscarriage. I had recently miscarried a few months before. And I never processed. I just made myself, I cried by myself and then told myself while crying, get over it. Just get over it. And it was so hard. And Sierra had a very deep conversation with me, and she asked me how I processed my miscarriage. And I said, I just told myself to get over it. And as women, there are a lot of us that have to feel like we have to tell ourselves to get over it just to keep going, so we don't break down, so we don't throw a fit or throw things or just feel like it's all over for us, right? Um, but I love that you challenged me in that moment to process the negative. And so I want to know, why is it important for people to feel all the negative feelings during the dark moments?
Absolutely. I think it's important to process all life and to move through them. And as far as processing difficult time, it's because they happen. They matter. You're collecting things, collecting stories as you go, collecting thoughts as you go, collecting feelings as you go, collecting memories as you go. They happened and they matter. And so, why is it important to process that? Because that mattered. It mattered that a baby came through your body and passed through your body, and it didn't make it. And it mattered all that physical pain. It mattered the stress that it put on your family. It mattered that you have to balance the reality of taking care of one child while losing another, or the responsibilities you make. All that complexity, those layers, our lives, they matter. And so I like to describe it as like, if I pick something up, if I pick up a loss, if I pick up a negative event, a harmful event, a difficult event, it's affecting me. And if I tell myself, if I try to convince myself, oh, that did get over it, right? And I'm using that as an example because that's how I was taught also. Get over it. It's like I don't actually get over it. I shove it under the rug. And I might persist and I might ignore, but it's still under the rug. And if I keep stacking stuff on top of it, pretty soon I'm standing on a hill. That's going to make things, maybe it's going to make it a little harder to pivot. It's going to make it a little harder to move. Or I'm going to be heavier. So just because we don't try to hold it in our consciousness, it doesn't mean that it isn't still there affecting us. Because not processing the hurt of that first loss carried me into my second loss and created all that anger. It was directly related to that first one. And just instead of like healing and accepting the possibility of loss, which is how I went into my third pregnancy. In that second, instead of healing and accepting, I just trying to avoid and distract and overcompensate. And that made a more physically painful and more emotionally painful experience. So when things happen to us, it's important to hold them and look at them, create space for them, accept them, move through them so we can get to the other side, so we can heal. And healing doesn't mean, oh, I don't experience negative emotions anymore. I'm not going to cry about that thing anymore. But it allows you to hold multiple things in your hand. A reality where I am a mom who lost two babies, and I'm a mom who is very happy that Nigel is here. And it's all true.
I love that. I am a mom. I lost two babies, but Jael is here.
Mm-hmm.
It's empowering.
Yeah.
It's empowering.
Yeah.
I really want to hone in on the process of overcoming. And I know that you've talked about how it weighs on you. But one of the things that triggers most women who have been through this experience is talking with other people who can't really relate. And they say, oh, I'm so sorry. And I'll pray for you and all these things. And sometimes we really don't want that. That's why we don't share it. We don't want your pity. We don't want your pity. We feel pitiful enough. And just speaking from my own personal experience. But Siera, what can, if there is a person who maybe they haven't experienced it personally, but their friend has experienced it. For example, my cousin called me and she told me about her friend who experienced a loss, and she hadn't responded to her friend after her friend shared it with her because she didn't know what was appropriate to say to her. She couldn't wrap her head around that of how to support her or how to show her love. What can people outside of this situation do for those mothers who are experiencing that, whether it's barrenness of the womb or miscarriage? What can people do to console and help and support?
I think that's a great question because I was a direct recipient of some of those phrases. You know, even in that first loss, to writing again to process it, and I would write down everything that people would say to me and why it wasn't helpful and what they could say instead. As like a learning process of like, if I can't get my family to say this to me, then I'm going to help someone else's family say this to them to comfort them. So one, I think this is just something we're not trained or to do, which is to hold negative emotion, to be okay with hard stuff. We don't want to feel it. But for my people around me, and again, I was trying to be the sacrifice for not only the people after me, but whoever's listening, is to teach people. So if someone said, at least you can get pregnant, that's not helpful. At least you don't have to hear a baby crying in the middle of the night. I would love to hear a baby crying in the middle of the night. I would love to have the chance to hold my baby and hear them crying in the middle of the night. That's not a comfort. So I would tell people to be curious. Is say you could say, and not even to your, maybe it's not your friend that you're curious about. Oh, my friend experienced loss. There's TED Talks. I literally, my dad was, and I love my dad. You know my dad. My dad said kind of not the greatest things. Like he almost was avoiding me because he didn't know what to say. And we sat in his car and we watched a 17-minute TED Talk of what it's like to lose a child. And when he saw it, he could immediately relate, because he plays guitar and he was like, well, what if I could never play guitar again? And what if all the Instagram ads had all these guitar players and everything was just constantly reminding me of what could have been or what used to be? And he was like, that would be really hard for me. And I know guitar playing is not the same as miscarriage, but it's one of the loves of his life. And so if something like this happens, it might not be that person who teaches you what to say, but you can find information to become knowledgeable about this loss, to become knowledgeable about the thoughts and feelings and the sentiment, like how people actually process this loss. And then you can talk very plainly to your friend. They've been through the hardest thing, maybe one of the hardest things they've ever been through. You're not going to break them. They're already broken. You're not going to break them. And you could just say, it hurts me that I don't know what to say. And even in that, I love you. You can talk to me about anything. You can talk to me about the physical, the emotional. If you need a distraction, if you don't want to be distracted, if you think about them while you're on a walk, tell me. I want to remember them with you. I want to be an open door. You don't have to apologize. You don't have to protect me from anything. I am here. And the people who said to me, I'll remember your baby, which was my twin sister Tiara, who you also know and love. And that was one of the most powerful things anyone said to me. And they said, if you want, and someone else said, if you want to name that baby, name that baby. There are no rules. And those things helped me heal, and they helped me feel like I wasn't alone. And I talked about what was going on inside of me out loud, or I wrote about it. And that really helped me. So educate yourself on loss. And if you're listening to this and someone has gone through this in your life and you don't know what to say to them, come find me on social media. come find me, and I'm happy to share resources with you and talk with you, or talk to your friend. Even I've talked to complete strangers who I've never met to this day, pages and pages of just sharing our experiences and connecting with people. Because if you don't know what to say, connect them to somebody who does.
I am almost in tears. I think about what you said. I would really have loved for someone to say that to me. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay. Name that baby.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of a simpler time when we are young adults or even children and we think about all the kids we're going to have. My husband
Mm-hmm.
and I, before we got married, we talked about how many kids we wanted to have. We wanted to have three. And that desire was in my heart. And so sometimes I think about those three children, but I'm grateful for my one, you know? And if the three never comes, I'm so thankful for my one.
Mm-hmm.
But I would really have loved for someone to hold me in that moment and say, hey, name those children. I love that you share that and that you've had people who are in your corner because some people go through these losses alone. My first miscarriage, I had my husband and I wasn't alone, but um, my second one, I had my best friend, but they weren't in close proximity. It was just, well, my husband was, but my friend was, over the phone. And so, you know, um, you try to find ways to cope. And I'm so glad that you have provided those resources for friends to support their friends and, learn that TED Talk is a really great resource. As well as at Comeback Sierra. That's the at sign COMESIERA. You can find her on Instagram at Come Back Sierra. Okay, one word, no spaces. Um, and she will be a resource for you or support you in whatever way you need, which is really beautiful. But I know that we've talked a lot about the negative process. But one thing you said to me was, Melanie, if you don't feel all of the negative, then how can you enjoy the positives when they come? And so, my question to you, Sierra, is how do you process the joy of the healing process? How do how do you enjoy that healing process and those positive things that are, a part of that process is a part of the positive moments? How do you?
Yeah. So let me go back. Can I go back? And I just want to say one thing to you, my dear friend Melanie. I invite you to consider if your heart desires, you can still name those babies. Okay? Only if you want to, only if it feels right. It's never too late.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you for creating space for me to just say that. Okay. So, to your question, how do you make space for the joy in the healing process? Um, this is what I would say. So I'm hearing the question a few ways, which is in my head, I'm like, well, is healing joyful or the act of healing itself? And to that, I would say healing hurts. Healing is uncomfortable. Healing is work. Healing is maybe the long game, the long game. So I think when it comes to maybe holding joy while healing, I would say healing again, healing's happening, but there's so many other things that are happening. Tell me if and you can follow up if I'm not answering this the way you intended. But healing is going to be uncomfortable. But alongside healing, other things are happening. Life is happening. Light, Light, light is also happening. So if we allow ourselves to feel and go through those really difficult things and we're present, we're not just numbing. When we feel that hard, we're also going to let some light in too. If we're just numbing because we don't want to feel the negative, we're going to miss out on the positive as well. And so I remember learning that in my clinical psychology program as one of the things I took with me. which was you can't just numb negative emotions. If you're numbing your emotions, you're going to numb it all. Because if you think about it, I remember working with people and they would say, like, oh, I don't want to get my hopes up. So if something good is happening to you, you can't relish in that. You can't feel the weight of that joy because you are anticipating something knocking you down, something hurting you, something taking that away, right? So when we try to numb this hard thing, we can't really feel the joys of the other things going around, or maybe the joys within that scenario. So for me, once I learned that information, I was determined to view emotions, and this is a key. So if you're taking notes, write it down. Emotions, information.
Say that again.
Emotions are information. If I'm hurting, it's because something mattered to me. Something was important. That baby was important to me. That's not bad. That's love. Someone even said that grief is unexpressed love. So even the fact that I do hurt means that I love. I love. And so how can I love and not grieve? It's impossible. And so God created this wide range of feelings for us. When we feel those things, it's telling us something. And if we allow ourselves to feel it, then we can get underneath it and figure out why we feel that way. Why do I feel that way? Oh, because this actually really deeply connected me to this person. Or it really made me feel icky because it denies this whole part of my existence. Of course I feel angry. Of course I feel frustrated or even envious. Why do I feel envious? Why do I feel so judgmental or whatever? And so, or disgusted, okay? But also, again, like I was saying, I'll just summarize it. Emotions are information. And so if we allow ourselves to go through those hard emotions, we're going to, one, relieve those things, move through them, and create more space for joy. But we're also going to be able to just, maybe that's just the one point. We will move through those negatives. Those positives are happening at the same time. So if we feel the negative, we're going to be able to feel that positive too. But also, as we move through and accept the negative, we're creating more room for light. We're creating more room for joy. We're cleaning it out. And when I say cleaning it out, it doesn't necessarily mean it goes away. It doesn't mean we'll never be sad about that thing anymore, but just creates more space.
I love that you said grief is unexpressed love. And letting in light is making more room. You're just making more room. That negativity doesn't fill you up, but it's there. You acknowledge it, you respect it, you appreciate the process that you experienced. And I love that you said it is information. Why? Because now that you have this information, now you can bless someone else with it. Now you can relate to someone else. Now you can support someone else. Now you know the words or the sentiments or how to express to someone what they're going through. You get it. You can say, yeah, I get it, you know.
And to add to that, because I wasn't even thinking about other people, if I'm being real, I was just thinking about me. I was just thinking about if I what were you saying? You were saying, okay, because the information for the information piece, because I'm like, if I know why I feel this, then maybe I can have more empathy towards myself. Maybe I can release it out into the world. Maybe I can deal with the problem that's underneath that. Um, Maybe just bringing it to light makes it dissipate thinner. Maybe it's not as heavy when it's out in the light. Or you get more help once you bring it out to the light. Whatever it may be, that information is going to teach us something, and it's going to help. Yes, it can help others, but it is undoubtedly going to help us in our bodies. And I say that because I feel emotion in my body. I don't know about
Yes.
you, but I feel it physically.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yes, it'll help others, but also it's going to help you first.
Well, I'm a firm believer that we don't go through things for just ourselves. Yes, we learn and we have that process and we get to um, grieve. But if we hold it all in and never share with someone else, and I mean not sharing in a matter of just to express it, maybe you run into someone who recently went through that, but because you don't open up and talk, you wouldn't know because we don't share these things until we know that someone else can relate when it comes to uh, pregnancy for most women or loss or grief, any type. It's not even just pregnancy. You get what I'm saying? You
Mm-hmm.
know, I'm, and I'm just talking about in a roundabout traditional way. I think what is happening here um, is outside of the status quo. I know that when I was growing up, my own mother experienced loss, but to talk about it, to express all the emotions that we go through, the rage, the anger, the jealousy, the envy, the judgment. I went through those things, when we express that, hey, yeah, it does trigger us to see somebody else in a position we would like to be in. And we're mad about it. And it's okay to say that to yourself, but you don't never say that out loud. You're like, oh, hold on there. Well, you don't want anybody to know you're jealous. And
Me never.
me, jealous, never. Angry, psh, I ain't got time for that. But but the reality is that every emotion you feel is for a purpose. First, it's for you. Yes. And eventually, if you're willing, it can be for someone else. Like Sierra's story here is for all of you who are listening. And we appreciate you so much for listening. Sierra,
Mhm.
our time is coming to an end, but I'd like to ask you, would you mind sharing some encouraging words for the women um, that are seeking to be mothers or have experienced complications and losses, not quite there yet, or maybe even just some resources they can use to process
Mhm.
their negative, and which I hope that they were taking notes and got got some tips from earlier. Okay, write everything down. Point number one. Two, listen to a TED talk.
Seriously. Okay. I know the TED Talk point is funny, but it literally, I was so desperate to get my family to understand what I was going through because they were immediately around me and at the time, not the most helpful.
But that's a
And
great idea. I would have
yeah,
never
but
thought of
it
that.
was online and it was so helpful and I was so thankful that my dad was just willing to sit there and listen to a 16, 17-minute long video with me in the car before we were about to take a walk. And uh, yeah, it was, yeah. So it's a resource. The internet is a resource. Um, for encouragement, I'll say this. One, I'm sorry. And two, and people say this all the time, you're not alone. You're not alone. That doesn't mean you don't feel like it. Um, so I just wanted to say that maybe you're not sharing your story publicly, but if you could have just the courage and the sheer willpower to lean into opening up to one person, to someone, your story matters. And if they don't understand you, I promise you someone very, very close to you does. this loss that we experience is so much more common than we even knew, than I even knew. I had so many people stacked right around me that maybe it wasn't my parents or it wasn't, the people closest to me, but there were women waiting, ready to talk to me the moment that they knew what I was going through. And again, come find me on social media and I can connect you to so many women or resources that maybe will just help resonate with you. And I'll share some of those. But your story matters. What you went through matters. And then I want to say something that's very, very difficult. And I'm nervous to say, which is I had to realize and accept, and this is what made my third journey in trying to pursue a family possible, which is to accept that God does not promise us baby. That's not under the list of things he promises us. And if you are a person of faith and if you are in a faith community and someone tells you that and you cling to that as being true, it's not. And I don't know if this is not the most encouraging word, but it's the truth, is that because that is true, it allowed me to accept my babies for all that they were, whether they were 18 or 8 weeks or 12 weeks. It allowed me to have acceptance. It allowed me to experience joy early in my pregnancy, knowing that there was a possibility that was all I had with that baby. That was all I had with Nigel. Even though he's here, I had to accept that he might not get to stay. And because I knew he might only be there for a short time, it made me lean into all the really good things much sooner to enjoy him. So is even though we're not promised that we get to carry our own children, what your life can look like can still be full. And it's okay to carry that grief with you, no matter if you decide to have a family or you decide to go another route with your life. It can still be very, very full. And that doesn't take the grief away. And most importantly, that God is grieved with us, that it's not him taking your babies away. And I just want you to know that. Again, I don't know if that sounds encouraging because loss is not this fun thing. And I'll always carry it with me and I'll always cry about it. And me and my husband were talking before this and we were crying about it, okay? Because it is always going to be a big part of us. But I want you to know that there's healing is possible, peace is possible, acceptance is possible. And I think if I could offer any advice or any resources, again, I want you to remember emotion is information. It's not a bad thing. And if you can look at it that way, if you cannot judge your emotions, whether it's anger or envy, you can understand why it's there. And that why is probably really understandable. You can probably really relate to that. Like, yeah, I'm envious, but it's just because I have this huge desire in my heart to fail. Yeah, I'm angry. And I was so angry in that second loss because I had lied to myself. Okay. So it made that make sense. It made it make sense. Um, Resources that you should have on hand or just familiarize yourself with a list of emotions. I think when we think about positive emotion or difficult emotion, we don't know how to put a name on it. We have a few: anger, sadness, um, rage. What about disgust? Or I don't know if I said envy, but they're just being able to name your emotion is a good place to start because then you can begin to understand it and accept why it's there. Or maybe move through it differently. I want to caution you when I say this, but Facebook groups, there's lost groups out there. One was particularly triggering to me, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. They're not experts in there. They're people who are hurting and healing right alongside you. So just be cautious. I would also say that therapy, again, that was a huge part of my healing. I'm an advocate, of course, based on my studies and my own personal experience. Find somebody to talk to. the worst thing you could do is isolate yourself and believe the lie that you're alone. Um, and so I just want to encourage you in that way. And then they there are some pages on social media that have been a support to me. So I'll list them here. You can play it back. I'm gonna say them real fast, and you can write them down. Instagram page is called Born Still, Sad Dads Club. So for the fathers out there, the Miscarriage Doula. There's someone. Her name is Ashley Lemieux, who has experienced loss later in pregnancy. And then myself, which is Come Back Siera, Siera, so just one R. Come find us. I'm not affiliated with any of the other pages, but they've been a great help to me in my healing journey. So thank you for just giving me space to speak on this.
Wow, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you. And thank you so much for those resources. And to the listeners, anybody who has felt like we've been maybe a little careless or insensitive, please know we've been sincere in our hopes in sharing this. This is a very sensitive topic, and one that's not easy for people to relive. And we understand that. Uh, I will reiterate what Sierra has said. You are not alone. In fact, Sierra and I are with you, and we will be the start of your support group. I also want to say, yeah, Sierra, tell us something.
Okay, the one thing I wanted to just piggyback of what you just said, which is no two losses are the same, and no two people are the same. And um, I can only speak from my experience, Melanie from her experience, and what we've learned from it. And I always encourage people to share their experience because we're never going to be exhaustive in capturing the pain that people feel, the sentiment they feel, the thoughts they feel, the anger they feel, or even how you healed. And that's why when we say your story matters, um, your story might fill in the gaps that we have. We know we have gaps. We know that maybe where our laughter was could create some pain for someone, or where our talk about, our faith, maybe the way you're looking at, maybe you are angry with God. That none of this whole conversation is from a place of like our healed place, our heart space, and it's not exhaustive because your story adds to whatever we just said. And we can't speak on that. And so we invite you to share your story with us, or wherever you are, and know that in an effort to have a really difficult conversation, we know there are holes, and we know that we're not experts. We're just sharing what we know.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Psalms 37:3 reads, Trust in the Lord and do good. Then you will live safely in the land and prosper. Verse 4 says, Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you your heart's desires. Verse 5 says, Commit everything you do to the Lord. Trust him, and he will help you. Well, that's our show. I'm Melanie Carter, your host of Be Positive Speaks Radio Ministry. Thank you for listening and joining me on this positive journey of exploration and inspiration. Remember, if you like this episode and enjoyed the show, like, subscribe, and share. If you want to join the conversation, please comment below your thoughts. You're invited to submit topics you'd like us to dive into right here on Be Positive Speaks Radio Ministry. Thank you, and until next time, stay positive and be salt and light in the earth.